Hi, this is Karen Friedman Agnifilo with Legal AF, and joining me today is my good friend and colleague, Elie Honig, he's my colleague on CNN. We are both legal analysts for CNN, and Elie also has his own podcast called Third Degree and sends out a column once a week that I always read, and I usually agree with everything he says because he's a brilliant lawyer and ex-prosecutor and just a really accomplished person. But this one, I have to say, I don't 100% agree with you. In fact, I don't agree with you at all. So I thought it would be fun if we debated it. It's about the merits of Attorney General Letitia James bringing this sweeping civil fraud trial that's going on right now in New York State against Donald Trump in front of Judge Arthur Engoron, where the judge in a bench trial already found that the Trump organization and Donald Trump and most of his adult children have engaged in persistent fraud throughout their businesses and business dealings here in New York. So the case is all wrapped up. It's waiting for closing arguments in early January, and then Judge Engoron's going to rule. But Elie, I'm going to turn it over to you to say why you think that not only is this prosecution not merited, that you're not happy with Letitia James, her statements that she makes, and the fact that she brought this case at all. So we'll turn it over to you. And thanks so much for joining me to have this discussion.
First of all, the way this happened, which we can just tell the viewers, is you texted me and said, read the column all the time, disagree with this one. Do you want to hop on a podcast? And here we are 20 minutes later. Because of course, I do love to hear what you have to say, and it's fun to debate these things. We may end up agreeing, I think, on some of the things. My issue, the point about whether the lawsuit itself is justified is a secondary point of the piece, and I think is fairly debatable. I can make the argument either way, and I see the argument either way. I don't feel strongly about that. I think there's an interesting debate to be had that has not been fully had on Trump's side. It's easy to say fraud, and there is fraud, but there's other factors. My bigger point with the piece, though, is to criticize Letitia James and her overt politicization of this case. And essentially, my argument has a couple main points. Number one, Letitia James ran for office as New York State Attorney General in 2018. Her number one campaign plank was vote for me and I'll nail Donald Trump. And I quote in the piece, there's literally dozens of statements she made. I'm in this to nail Trump. I'll get Trump. Vote for me. I'll get Trump. And she fundraised off of that. She said, donate to me so I can nail Trump. During that campaign and before she had access to a single piece of evidence, she announced that he would be should be indicted for money laundering. God knows what she's talking about. She just anything, whatever. She's just feeding red meat. The day after she was elected, before she took office and had no access to any evidence whatsoever, she declared, let me try to find this quote. We're going to definitely sue him. We're going to be a real pain in the ass. He's going to know my name personally, end quote. Why do I object to all this? Donald Trump has famously been saying publicly, he said about 3 weeks ago, that if he's reelected president, he's going to weaponize DOJ. He'll use it to go after his political opponents. We all rightly excoriated him for that. I know Letitia James' rhetoric is nowhere near as ominous and dangerous as Donald Trump's. Donald Trump uses Nazi-like rhetoric, vermin, poison blood, which is despicable and way beyond anything Letitia James has ever said. That doesn't mean Letitia James is right, though. That doesn't mean Letitia James is in the clear. If you object to a person running for office and promising to use the power of that office to go after political opponents, people who are unpopular politically to that side, and you should be against that, you can't justify what Letitia James has done, the way she's run her campaign. And what I say in the article is, if you're okay with the way Letitia James ran for office as the top law enforcement official in New York State, by saying, vote for me and I'll nail the very unpopular politician on the other side, I don't know what for, something, she threw out money laundering, this, that, we'll sue him for something, he'll definitely sue him. Then you have to be fine with somebody right now running for Delaware State AG saying exact same thing, Hunter Biden, Joe Biden. Vote for me. I will nail the Bidens. I don't know, money laundering. We'll definitely sue their ass. They're going to know my name. You have to be okay with somebody running for DA in, I don't know where Chappaqua is, I guess Westchester County, New York. Same thing about the Clintons. Vote for me. I'll nail the Clinton Foundation. I don't know, something, money laundering. Just vote, donate to me because I'm going to get the Clintons. I'm not okay with any of that. So that's part one of my critique. Part two of my critique is Letitia James's conduct and public statements during this trial, which let's put that on hold. I'll let you respond to part one.
Part one. Well, I'm going to start with saying two things. Number one, my really good friend, Dave Suchman, I don't know if you know him. He was an executive under Cy Vance at the Manhattan DA's office, and he is actually running for Westchester County DA, and he's excellent. So I'm just shamelessly plugging him.
My very good friend, Mimi, Mimi, and I think yours too, Mimi Roca, who was a mentor of mine and still is the Westchester DA. She's finishing up her term. Yeah.
Yeah, well, she's decided not to run. So David is running. Anyway, I'm just shamelessly plugging him because I think he'd be excellent at carrying on her legacy. But yeah, so as to point one that you're making, I understand what you're saying, but the reason I take issue with it is twofold. Number one, I don't consider Donald Trump her political opponent, right? She's a state court. She's a state elected official. Yeah, she happens to be in the Democratic Party, but she's a state elected official. She has nothing to do with the Biden administration. She has nothing to do with Donald Trump from a political standpoint. The only thing she has to do with Donald Trump is that he is a constituent of New York State. And as the Attorney General, she has an obligation, and she has this law, right? Executive Law 6312, which allows her to go after, on a civil context, almost like a prosecutor, but in a civil context, against persistent fraud in New York State. So I want to do an exercise that you did, which is you started your article on this saying, it's basically saying you can't say all of the things I'm going to go after my opponents, this and that, and you condemned Trump for doing it, and then you said, but now let's change he to a she, and let's talk about Letitia James, and that was how you introduced your argument. So I'm going to do the same thing to you. Let's say New York was having a horrible issue with the mafia. I know another topic that you love, and let's say Al Capone was still out there infamously making sure that people get killed and people die and people are, just all the terrible things that the mafia used to do. And let's say the top law enforcement official were running for office and saying, you know what, I'm going to put lots of resources into bringing down the mob. I am going to come out and I'm going to get Al Capone for anything I can because he always evades prosecution. And he, so they got him for tax evasion. And, you're the expert on Al Capone. So I'm just, I'm talking about what I recall. And, so the issue is if Donald Trump he's only made himself a political candidate in order to avoid being held accountable for his consequences. He's a fraudulent business person
How do you know that? You're making up motivation. Okay, let me jump in for a couple of things. First of all, it's fine to say, I'm running for office because I want to target white collar crime, mob, drug trafficking, whatever. When you do it, though, when you name another, Al Capone's not in politics. That's an inapposite comparison. And is your position that it's perfectly fine to say I'm going to single out a person on the other side as long as you're not directly running against them? Because then you're fine with the person running for Delaware AG. Are you okay with that? Are you okay with someone running for Delaware AG saying, in their view, Hunter Biden is the height of fraud, and says, I'm going to vote for me and I'll nail Hunter Biden and maybe Joe Biden too? Are you okay with that?
I think people should be able to follow the evidence wherever it leads. If they can bring a case, if people can bring a case against Joe Biden, they should, or if you can find evidence against Joe Biden, bring it on. I'm not afraid
that's
of the
after
truth.
You get into office. I'm talking about during the campaign. Are you okay with a Republican candidate for Attorney General of Delaware saying, vote for me, everybody in Delaware, and I promise you, I'll sue Hunter Biden's ass, Joe Biden's ass, I will take them down. They can be indicted for money laundering. Are you okay with that? Yes or no?
I think people should be able to say whatever they want. I mean, I'm not going to vote for a Republican. Okay. So
no, I know people have the right. I'm not saying she's breaking the law. I'm saying it's disgraceful conduct for someone who's a prosecutor. I'm not okay with it. I'm not okay with any. Are you okay? I'll ask you again. Are you okay with a candidate for AG in Delaware or Republican saying, vote for me, everyone, donate to my campaign, I will nail the Bidens on something, I promise you? Are you okay with that?
I have no problem with them saying that, but at the end of the day, put your money where your mouth is. I mean, if there is something to nail them on, then do it. If there isn't, there isn't. I mean, that's the thing.
Well, that's a separate
I don't
question.
have a problem.
That's a separate
with it.
question. That's not a response, though. Saying, well, she turned out to be right. I mean, both of those things can be true. It's inappropriate to campaign for elected prosecutorial or prosecutorial-like office by promising to nail a certain person before you have access to one piece of evidence. That's where I have a problem. The case itself, I think, it's a fair argument that this case is justified. I think there's arguments both ways. And I also, Donald Trump is not this case does not by any means make Donald Trump out to be the Al Capone of fraud. I mean, he is not the leading fraud. Look, Donald Trump definitely vastly overinflated his numbers. There are fraudsters, you know this, Karen. There are fraudsters all over the state of New York who are stealing money from vulnerable people, from senior citizens, from government funds. What Donald Trump did here, yes, his numbers are ridiculous. It meets the technical requirements of fraud, no doubt. But let's also be real. He's making these representations to very sophisticated players, banks, who can do their own due diligence, made him the loans that were by and large, A, repaid, B, with interest. And this, by the way, I think is a reason nobody was willing to charge it criminally. So it's simply not fair to say he's the Al Capone of fraud based on this case. This is a borderline for people. Prosecutors charge fraud cases all day where there's actual victims put out of house and home, lost money out of pocket. This is not that. This is a fraud case. It's got its strengths. It's not its weaknesses, but he's not the person you would pick out as the biggest fraudster in the entire state by any means.
So I understand that you can make that argument. I don't think anyone is necessarily saying that he's the biggest fraudster, but he has amassed a New York-based enterprise, largely New York-based enterprise, based on lies. And I think if you read Judge Engoron's most recent 3-page, really short motion to dismiss, or opinion on the 5th motion to dismiss that Trump filed, he really outlines and justifies why it's not just fraud, it's persistent fraud, and why it's not just because the numbers are overvalued or undervalued. It's because of the number of lies that they put into the math equation to come up with the numbers, right? And it's things like tripling the size of an apartment, or saying that it's all 100% occupied when it's not, or saying that it's not rent controlled when it is, or, all of the different just lies that went into it. And it's the cumulative number of lies that allowed him to build the foundation and the money and the empire. And it's just, it's about leveling the playing field.
I agree with all you just said. I did a case when I was in New York, I was a second or third year, involving a woman who was basically she found 10 or 12 senior citizens and lied to them and defrauded them and stole their essentially life savings. What's a more serious, what case of fraud concerns you more? Donald Trump or that one? Donald Trump lying to get loans from banks, repaying those loans with interest, or this run-of-the-mill person who stole money from senior citizens and left them broke? Who's worse? Which is a worse fraud?
I think that the one you just said is probably worse. I don't know what are you defining worse for? What point?
My point is not that what Donald Trump did is okay. My point is the analogy where the excuse for Letitia James, that all she's doing is identifying the leading player in a major problem in Donald Trump, the biggest fraudster in New York.
Okay, let's say a leading player. How's that? You might not be the biggest, but he's a leading.
Okay, but I agree with you on the merits of the case. I mean, for sure. But I want to jump to your point too. Yep. Yeah. I've really been surprised actually at the Letitia James's public comments and statements, what you and I would call extrajudicial, meaning what she wants to say in her briefs and in the courtroom on the record, that's almost all fair play. What I have a problem with is the statements that Letitia James has made, on the courthouse steps. Those have been sort of benign. She's given press conferences and she just says, okay, she says the truth will prevail and this and that. More problematically is her tweets, public statements. While this case is going, and she really saves her fire for the days when the Trumps are testifying, she's tweeting explicitly, they're lying, they're liars on the stand. Maybe they are, okay? But what would happen to you or me in a criminal, I know it's not a criminal case, but let's start here. In a criminal case, or let's take it a civil case. How about a civil case done by the U.S. Attorney's Office? What if Preet, when he was my U.S. attorney, while that case was happening, while witnesses were on the stand, was making extrajudicial statements, public statements outside of court saying, this witness who's testifying right now in our civil case is lying. He's a liar, and his whole family's liars. Case would be thrown out. Preet would get fired. Those two things would happen. Now, Letitia James is different because she's elected, but I have a big problem with the statements she's been making during this trial. I'm not sure. Where are you on that?
Yeah, so look, this is something that we struggled with when I worked for the Manhattan DA, Cyrus Vance, and because we were very much always trying to walk that fine line. You're absolutely right that, the rules of professional conduct governing lawyers and prosecutors, it's Rule 3.5 says a lawyer shall not basically speak publicly about a case other than talking about things that are in the public record. And so, we definitely, Rule 3.6. So we definitely struggled with that a lot. And however, there is one exception and one caveat, and that's subdivision D of Rule 3.6. And I just want to read it. It says, notwithstanding paragraph A that sets forth the rules that you're talking about, right?
Don't do this part.
Don't do these things. A lawyer may make a statement that a reasonable lawyer would believe is required to protect a client. So it is also themselves, it also counts for the people of the state of New York being your client, from the substantial prejudicial effect of recent publicity not initiated by the lawyer or the lawyer's client. A statement made pursuant to this paragraph shall be limited to such information as is necessary to mitigate the recent adverse publicity. And so I have been really struggling with what you just said, and Letitia James' statements too. But if you look at, they are always in response to Trump and his lawyers, their incessant press conferences, and they're commenting, and their personal attacks against Letitia James. And they go after her, they go after this case, they go after the motivation of this case, and they lie. They go in court and they testify to one thing, and then Donald Trump goes outside and lies. You can look at the record about what is said in court, and then you look at what he says outside, and it's just a bold-faced lie. And so I would argue that in this context, generally speaking, I agree with you 1,000%. It's very important not to make public statements, especially when a case is going on. And this is civil, but it's quasi-prosecutorial. I would say that the statements she has made are a reasonable response to what has been the lies and it's necessary to mitigate the lies that Trump is perpetuating on his Truth Social and his public statements outside of court. And so I would argue that she actually has a duty to correct the record and come out and say it. And so in this case, in this instance, I actually agree with her doing it.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, look, you're bringing me closer to your position. I get it now. I get what the justification is. Here's what she tweeted, though. Donald Trump will continue to lie and claim that he did nothing wrong. The truth is, we already proved he committed years of financial fraud. There are consequences for breaking the law. So you're saying it's the what we would call the tit for tat provision of the rules of ethics. Okay. I mean, look, it's not good. It's not good form, I would say, even if you can point to section 3.5D or whatever and say, well, I'm doing it under that. It's 3.6.
I misspoke. 3.6.
3.6. It's not a good look. It's not something I would ever teach or counsel a prosecutor to do. She made a video. I mean, look, let's be honest. She's relishing this. She didn't have to go and make a video one weekend during the trial. I mean, she's leaning hard into this. She's not just issuing sort of bare bones statements, the record must be corrected. They are playing like campaign ads, but your point is a good one. I take it. But I think when you combine all of it, to me, it conveys it undermines the sense of impartiality that you want in this state's top prosecutor. And, it's interesting, you and I both followed the election for Manhattan DA when it was obviously there was a massive Democratic primary, right? And obviously whoever won the Democratic primary was going to win. And I'm friends with Alvin Bragg, as I think you are. You are too, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
I've gotten to know him since he's been elected. And
right, you were there before him. But Alvin's a good friend of mine. And some of the candidates, not Alvin, were taking this sort of, easy road of vote for, it's even worse when you're talking specifically criminal. Vote for me and I'll indict this guy. Alvin always, for the most part, and I give him credit for this because he has a similar prosecutorial upbringing as me, went up to the line but never quite crossed it, right? He would say things like what you were suggesting earlier. He would say, well, look, I'm always going to focus on whatever the facts are and that kind of thing. But he always refused, to his credit, resisted the temptation to go, and I'll nail Trump. One time he kind of maybe slipped a little bit over the line. But this is a problem that I think pervades any electoral prosecutorial positions. I'm spoiled because I've only ever had to work for appointed prosecutors. I worked for U.S. attorneys. Of course, federal prosecutors are not elected. And even in New Jersey, when I was with the AG's office, we are one of, I think it's 7 states that does not elect the AG. It's governor appointed, same way president would appoint the U.S. attorney general. You work for the elected Manhattan DA. There's pluses and minuses both ways. But what caused me to write this column is just my concern with someone running for a powerful office like that, singling out an individual, maybe not a direct electoral opponent, but clearly a political opponent. I think they both consider one another political rivals or enemies or whatever. Maybe opponents isn't exactly the right word, and benefiting on it. I mean, it was the #1 platform of her campaign and then doing it. And again, I think the case itself has you well articulated its merits, which I get. And I don't think I'm on the fence as to whether the case definitely should have been brought or not. I think it's probably justified. There's a good argument that the corporate death penalty is overkill. I quote Ruth Marcus, who's a liberal Washington Post editor who did the work and came up to the conclusion that the remedy sought here is way out of line. And she hates Trump, she says in the article. But the remedy of putting him out of business is overkill, she argues. But to me, it's not the same as it's not as bad as what Trump did, but it's a very similar tactic. If you strip out the names and strip out the vile rhetoric, the promise is the same. Let me ask you this. I have a quick question for you. Why do you think I'm going to tell you, I'm not going to name names. A lot of people are very critical of Letitia James in the green room, but unwilling to criticize her in public. Why do you think that is?
I have no idea. I think she's phenomenal.
You're a true believer. Listen, you're not.
I've never worked for her, so I don't know what she's like. But I know
she's talented. I mean, she's good at what she does. Yeah, I say in the piece, people don't need to make excuses for Letitia James. She doesn't need it. She's highly competent. She's skilled. She knows what the heck she's doing. She doesn't need people apologizing for her. So I'm impressed with her in some respects, but I do think this whole explicit political target, you can't even say it's not political. She did it during a campaign. Explicit political promise to nail the other guy, I have a problem with.
Look, it's a completely valid point. I just, having worked for 2 different district attorneys, it's when you're on maybe they shouldn't be elected. Maybe they should just be appointed, because that's the problem with, and I agree with you. No actual line assistant, whether you're a federal or state prosecutor, should ever do any of this stuff. It's really Letitia James wears 2 hats, right? She is a politician, because unfortunately she has to be, because it's an elected office, and she's also the top law enforcement official in New York State. And so it's hard to walk that fine line. And and I think you point out the pitfalls. Anyway, I'm mindful of your time. I promised I'd have you off by now. Thank you so much for joining.
Can I embarrass you real quick before we end?
Oh God, what?
So there's a guy at my supermarket. He's a really sweet guy. He's a clerk there who I go there basically every day. He's I think he's Irish, and he loves CNN. And he stops me the other day and he goes, I'm doing a terrible accent. I love watching. I said, no, who? He has lots of comments. He goes, Karen. He couldn't say your last name. I was like, oh yeah. So I hope that embarrassed you.
It's very sweet. I love it. I love it very much. Well, tell him.
Sorry, one more thing. I will tell him your best. It is not that hard to say your last name. Everyone stumbles. Okay, Karen. easy. Friedman, easy. Agnifilo is not that hard. I know people get like mangled with the lots of I's and L's and O's. Karen Friedman Agnifilo, not hard.
Well, it is a mouthful though. And when I was at the Manhattan DA's office, no one ever called me anything other than KFA. The other problem is KFA. Well, because the other problem is, my first name has become weaponized in society. So apparently no one likes to ever say it. Anyway, happy holidays, Elie. No, I'm so appreciative of you joining. Great to see you. I'll debate you anytime on any topic. So thanks for joining.
Awesome. Bye, Kat.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for watching. We're only a few subscribers short of 2 million subs. Please subscribe right now to the MeidasTouch YouTube channel for free and help us grow this unapologetically pro-democracy network.